Welcome to episode 366 of the DFO Rundown presented by Bet365. Download the app today. Use the promo code NATION to get in on a huge range of markets. Whatever the moment, it's never ordinary at Bet365. I'm Jason Gregor alongside Frank Seravalli. As we talked lots last week, Frank, about all the teams that acquired players. We didn't really touch on the teams who just sold off, whether they got prospects or picks. I think we can start with the Islanders. Like, obviously, they got the best prospect of anybody at the deadline in Cal Ritchie.
I was wondering and trying to find some perspective of what I think the impact of this deal could ultimately be for the New York Islanders. And I know that this is a pretty large bet based on what I'm about to say. But is this the closest trade that we might end up getting to the Martin Erat for Filip Forsberg deal?
Well, I don't know if
I know that we're talking about a $9 million a year player in Forsberg, but I think the age kind of lines up, and it's probably more disrespect to Brock Nelson than I mean, because Martin Erat didn't have much left. I think Brock Nelson has plenty in the tank, but I just think that's how good Cal Ritchie could end up being for the New York Islanders. Like, they get a player that they're going to plug right into their lineup next season and the first round pick for a rental. Wow.
If Ritchie becomes that good, you're right. And the Islanders desperately need it, right? Like, they've got some young guys I like on their team. Don't Noah Dobson, Barzal when healthy, still pretty good player. Obviously Sorokin's really good player, but you're going to need someone else like that. And ultimately you probably need another one on top of it. But yeah, to get it for a player who's 34, who's, 3-4 years left, I think it's safe to say his best years most likely are behind him. He'll still be competitive. He's not going to be Martin Erat. Let's say that. Martin Erat, I'd look it up, but my God, did he even score 15 goals total after that trade? I'd have to look. So that aspect, it won't be as bad, but it's an interesting point when you look at trading away a really high young pick for a player that was, near the end of his career. As you mentioned, Nelson's got a lot of years left, but I don't think they're going to be as productive as his best years.
Yeah, so Martin Erat, after the trade, that year with the Caps, 9 games played, 1 goal, 2 assists for 3 points. Then the following season, he started with the Caps and had 1 goal in 53 games before he was traded to Phoenix at the time. So that year, 3 goals, 29 points, and played 1 more season in Arizona after that, 32 points. So in total, after the trade, playing, 150 some games, Martin Erat scored a total of
12 goals,
13 goals after the trade. Crazy. And Filip Forsberg, a play driving winger.
Yeah. Wow.
One of the few.
It was, and hey, I'll give the Islanders credit. They got a really good prospect and they got a good pick too. So now you got to make that pick count, of course. So I think of the sellers, they did well. You look at a few of the other teams. I actually, I like the Pittsburgh Penguins simply for what they did to get all of that for Michael Bunting. To me, is a win, right? You get Novak and Shen, and then you turn Shen into a second and a fourth. I know you said that they didn't. I know accident. That. Hey, even if they trip into it, even if you
no, you don't get credit for accidental stumbles. They didn't know what they were getting in Luke Shen, that he had value. Again, they thought that he was a throw into the deal. You don't get credit for that on the back end of it just because someone calls you and says, we're going to give you a second and a fourth. That's poor market analysis and poor understanding of the market.
Wow. Well, it worked out for them is all I'm saying. I agree with you, though. If they clearly, I just don't understand how they could think Luke Shen had no value. But worsely, the Nashville Predators, wait a second. Trade.
Well, let's still talk about the Pittsburgh Penguins part of it, because I think they fumbled their situation with Rickard Rakell. This is a guy that's had a dream season, especially for one who was not tradable 1 year ago. He's touched 30 goals already. His value right now as a as a Pittsburgh Penguin will likely never be higher than it is in this exact moment. And of all the things that the Edmonton Oilers got up to on Friday prior to the deadline, Rickard Rakell was actually one of the players that I believe they spent some time talking about and thinking about. But the ask from the Pittsburgh Penguins was so absurd relative to what Rickard Rakell is, or the risk on the back end potentially of that contract, 3 more years at $5 million. It kind of was a non-starter. The ask from Pittsburgh to teams on Rickard Rakell was a, quote, king's ransom. Pittsburgh wanted each organization's top prospect plus 2 first-round picks in order to get Rakell. So from the Oilers, it was Savoy and 2 first-round picks.
Yeah, come on.
Yeah, so they're like just unrealistic. Like what? Like why even engage in talks to move him if that's what your game plan is? Like, did they miss their opportunity with Rakell?
Well, honestly, is Pittsburgh, do they believe they're rebuilding, or are they still trying to retool?
Kyle Dubas has been very clear since the deadline and even probably right before it in saying publicly that his goal is to reboot the Penguins in as quickly a period of time as possible by collecting assets and then taking those assets and flipping them into players that they can use now. They are not rebuilding.
So then the only way so in order to retool, you got to keep some players, and Rakell's having a really good year. He's only 31, so maybe they think he can help. And then if somebody's willing to pay your astronomical asking price, I guess that's their strategy. But like, I still don't love Pittsburgh's strategy. I think retooling on the fly is infinitely harder than people think. And you got to get lucky in some senses, and you got to find a few diamonds in the rough. And I want to see if they do that, because that's the only way to do it. Like, look at Washington. Washington got lucky because they had some guys on LTIR. Then they could go out. They could make the Dubois trade. They could make the Chikrin trade. They could make all these signings because they had the LTIR space to do it.
So
and they got a little bit lucky in a sense with Strome, right? Like, I shouldn't say lucky. They had the wherewithal to say, we still think there's a player there. Let's go out and help that player reach his potential.
So Rakell is a player who has a concussion history. He had 28 goals 2 seasons ago in his first full season as a Penguin. Then last year, 15 goals. What happens if he goes back to being a 15 or 20 goal scorer? Then you're going to get nothing for him. You're stuck with him. Then what?
Yeah.
I mean, I get the idea of if we're truly going to do what we're going to do, and we're going to go try and flip these assets and turn around and be better in short order, you're going to need a guy who has 30 goal potential. That's 31. But was there a sweet spot to be had? And could you have done more with those first round picks to get a higher value player or a bigger difference maker in the summer? Let's say, you made a more reasonable deal, a prospect and a first round pick. Could you have taken that first round pick plus the other stuff you got and turned that into something impactful for you this summer?
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, it's something to look at, well, for sure. Now, one team, Frank, as we move around, the Boston Bruins. I actually don't mind a lot of what the Bruins did in their deals.
I thought low-key Boston had one of the best trade deadlines of any team that was not committed to making the playoffs. I've said this before, if you're going to rip the Band-Aid off, just do it. Do it as fast as you can. And maybe if they were in the same spot, or if Jeremy Swayman had a better run this year in net and they were firmly in a playoff position, maybe they would have traded Frederick and Brazeau anyway as 2 pending UFAs that they weren't going to re-sign. But by also trading Carlo and Coyle and then Marchand on top of it, like, they've really gotten to the bottom here of what they can in the meantime. Like, you're not those other guys that you're committed long-term to, you're not moving those pieces. You're not, because you're not able to. So the funny thing about that is the Bruins have suddenly looked the best that they have in weeks and might even still sneak into the playoffs. I'd say it's a real long shot, but they do have a baseline of talent that makes it a possibility that it could be, a true interesting last few weeks of the season in Boston. Can you imagine the story? You trade away those 5 players and you still end up making it. But the pieces that they got back in return, 2nd round pick, Casey Middlestat, Will Zellers, a conditional 2nd that can become a 1st, Fraser Minton, a conditional 1st from the Leafs, which is top 5 protected, I think, a 4th round pick in the Carlo deal, a 4th they got Henry Jokiharju for a 4th. They got Jacob Lauko, Marat Kuznetsov, and a 6th for Justin Brazeau, and a 2nd, a 4th, and Max Wanner from the Oilers in the Frederick deal. I mean, that's a pretty good haul when you stack all those things up, especially for some of those guys that were, UFAs.
Well, William Zeller in the USHL, he's like 38 goal. I got to double check, but I know he's one of the best goal scorers in that league. Now I know it's a very young league, and it's not high end, all their high end prospects, but there's lots of guys who come out of the USHL, and at least he's a player, 3rd round pick who's trending. After he was drafted, he had a really good year. And sometimes we see picks, Frank, they get drafted, and their next year you're just like, why'd this guy get drafted? He's not one of those guys. So at least he's a, he's not an A prospect, but at this stage he'd be a B prospect and maybe a B plus, which is pretty good.
How different in terms of impact are in the end Charlie Coyle and Casey Middlestat?
Well, I think Middlestat I think he has more natural offensive instincts than Coyle. And that's what they need in Boston. They need somebody who's a little bit more offensive minded as a center iceman. Right? And he's a guy who might hit the jackpot because he's going to get to play with David Pastrnak.
He just needs the consistency and compete is the big thing that stands out. Like it just wanes in and out, and the high end skill is great, but you've got to dig in and do the rest of the job. But in making the swap, I mean, Middlestat, I'm just double checking the ages. Middlestat is 26. Coyle, although he's a Boston kid, you get younger in the process. Charlie Coyle is 33. So you get 7 years younger. You get a 2nd round pick and Will Zellers. Like that's a pretty solid deal for the Bruins. And right now, again, Coyle to Middlestat, we can debate that all we want, but if you're going to sneak in the playoffs, maybe not necessarily that big of a drop off.
No, and I just looked it up, Frank. Zellers leads the USHL in goals by 10. They only, they have a shortened season. He has 38 goals this year, right? He's played 42 games. The next highest is Aiden Park at 28, and he's played 7 more games. So, that Will Zeller, definitely Boston got a young prospect who's got the potential. Keyword potential, but if Bruins fans are wondering about the guy, you're saying, hey, this isn't a bad player to get in that deal.
I mean, Coyle is definitely the more complete player, but Middlestat has easy 60-point consistent potential in him, in his skill level.
Yeah. Now, this team, Frank, we didn't really talk about them as a buyer because they got decimated by injuries. But if you look at the New Jersey Devils, and because the New Jersey Devils, here's who got hurt for the rest of the season in a 9-game span for the Devils: Jonas Siegenthaler, Quinn Hughes, Dougie Hamilton.
Jack
Hughes in a span of 9 games. Your leading scorer, 2 of your top 4 defensemen. Dougie Hamilton, I was looking it up. Dougie Hamilton on the ice for 94 goals, 5-on-5. The next highest is his defense partner, Brendan Dillon, and he's at 49. And then it goes down even more. So that's a huge loss. And they went out and they got Shalowski and they got Dumoulin to at least play and help out. And I know they've got these young guys, but you look at Semic played one game, Frank, since the trade deadline, went -3, didn't play the last 2 games. Like they're clearly they feel they're kind of in win now mode. And it's kind of fascinating when I look at, they didn't give up a ton, but they're like, hey, we don't want to just punt on the season. And they went out and got 2 defensemen that they at least can play in the lineup every night.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to give that high marks. It's definitely an overpay for Brian Dumoulin at this point in his career. And
what if it wins you around in the playoffs?
It's not going to.
You don't think they could beat Carolina?
I mean, I think it's a possibility. I wouldn't bet on it. I just think New Jersey and you mentioned Nemec, like if you watch the third period of the game that you're talking about, like he was so bad. Yeah. I don't know how they could play him. Like Sheldon Keefe said immediately after the game, this is not a developmental league. Like there's no learning on the fly, and there's definitely no learning on the fly in March when you're supposed to be playing meaningful games in a playoff hunt. Mm-hmm. So I think New Jersey is in the same spot that the Minnesota Wild were in that we talked about on our pod earlier in the week. It's not their year. And
yeah, that's fair.
I think to go out and spend at all, I mean, I get the idea of trying to reward your group because the guys that have played have definitely competed. But I think this idea leading up to the deadline that New Jersey was going to be just as aggressive as they were before the Hughes injury, like that would have been really short-sighted. I just don't think that this group is equipped to compete with the other big dogs in the East. Not yet. I think they can be. I think the building blocks are there, but I just don't think they're there just yet.
Well, the reason I like it for New Jersey, like they gave up Adam Beckman. He's an AHL defenseman in that deal. I don't think that's anything. They gave up a pick for Dumoulin. Was a 3rd rounder, if I'm not mistaken. So might be a little high, but if he's going to play 17 minutes a night for you, and you think, because if they can get to the playoffs, which they will, and then if all of a sudden Hamilton or Siegenthaler come back, and this just allowed you to stay in the playoffs, because, Columbus was kind of breathing down their neck. That was a huge win the other day for the Devils, because if Columbus beat them, they're within 2 points. Now they're 6 back, and so you got more breathing room. And because Carolina, to me, is open for the taking without Rantanen now. Like their team's not as good today. I know they got some good picks and yada yada, but today they're not as good. And then we've talked about even Washington. Like if you get in and suddenly now you're into the final 8, who knows? Maybe they can win a round or 2. And I agree with you.
I think was the case. That was the case to keep Rantanen. Is look at the way this bracket is set up. New Jersey without Quinn Hughes, or I said Quinn. Damn it, you said it. Now I said it. and I think we were talking injury, and I'm like, yeah, and Quinn Hughes is hurt too. That wasn't entirely wrong. But if you got New Jersey without Jack Hughes and then Washington in round 2, like if you've got Rantanen, like you're rolling the dice going, okay, like we can compete here. Like, why can't we be a team that gets to the conference final? And then you mentioned the dogfight that it's going to be on the other side of the bracket. Whoever wins that division in the Atlantic has such a leg up. Those other 2 teams are going to beat the heck out of each other in round 1. Round 2 should be a war as well. Who knows? Maybe the team that comes through from the Metro side catches the other end sleeping.
And actually, I was wrong. It was a 2nd rounder for Dumoulin. So obviously that's pretty high.
That's what I said. I said I wasn't going to give it high marks.
But if it works and they win a round or 2, then you're like, well, not bad. What did you make of the Ducks? Didn't do a ton. Chicago obviously got their goaltender. That was before in Seth Jones. San Jose added a little bit.
I love San Jose's deadline. I think we should talk about Mike Greer and what he's done. Like, It's not just deadline week. It's also the deadline period as a whole.
Like CC and Granlund, you're talking?
Yeah, I think he got really good value for CC and Granlund. Like, you have to remember how he acquired these pieces to begin with. Granlund, salary dump. Jake Wallman, he got a 2nd round pick to take him on, gets a 1st round pick for him in return. Low key, Mike Greer, this isn't how GM of the Year award works, because we always reward, and not we, because I'm not a voter, but the GMs always get rewarded and they vote for it during the conference final. And it's usually 3 finalists from the final 4 teams.
Yeah.
At some point, Mike Grier needs to get some consideration for the work that he's done and the pieces he's put in place. Like, think about all the positional boxes that he's checked in the last calendar year. Hopeful franchise goalie in Askarov. You know, if you're looking in the OHL, you've got Sam Dickinson on the back end. Still the jury's out on Shakir Mukhamadullin. Then up front, you've got your Celebrini plus Smith plus Eklund plus. And now you've got more draft capital to be able to do things with. Like, the other part of it is, as we tape this today, Bedard and Celebrini go head to head for the first time in their careers. Game doesn't mean anything necessarily in the standings, except that it's a 4-point swing for 32nd place. But the vibes still in San Jose, despite being a clear 32nd place, have been really good. Like that, look at Toffoli and the sleepover and like all the different little memes that we've had coming out of San Jose. Like, they've had fun this year being in 32nd place, which is kind of a weird thing to say. And that's not been the case, at least for the Hawks, until this last week or two, seemingly since the Seth Jones trade.
No, that's fair. The Celebrini Bedard is also an interesting one because, man, I talked to a lot of people who think Celebrini might end up being the better player, which is a fascinating debate and discussion. We'll see. I think they're different. Celebrini's overall game, probably both ends, is a little bit better, but Bedard's still probably, to me, a better offensive player. But
so who would you take?
Well, I honestly might lean towards Celebrini, if I'm being honest. I think I know that people in Chicago got all defensive about Biz's comments, but I don't think they were wrong. And I also think unfairly, if you look at the hype on Bedard was so grossly over and unfair that that's something, even if he scores 85 points, would be a heck of a, second season, third season, whatever it is, any season, to be honest. But the comparisons to suggest that he was Connor McDavid were so astronomically stupid that I think people will still view it like, oh, if this guy isn't generational, he'll be a failure. Well, I don't think he was ever generational. And that's not a knock, because generational is freaks of freaks. They're so rare, right? And I think that part of it is always going to linger over him. And I think it's unfair. He didn't ask for it. He never said he was a generational player, but that status got put on him by a lot of people who I thought were grossly premature.
So I think the interesting part about the debate for me, though, is it's not really who's better now. I think we'd all agree that Celebrini's been better now. I mean, for some added perspective and interest in the Calder race, Lane Hudson has more points, or as many points, as Connor Bedard does in year 2, which is really interesting. But it's not really about who's better now. It's about who's going to be better 3 seasons from now, because I think that's when it really matters.
Fair.
For both these teams, by the way, like, what happens this year as you're in 31st or 32nd place, who cares? Not to say it's meaningless, and the career arc of the players matters, but I would still pick Bedard, and for a few reasons. One, you hit on it with the higher end skill, but 2, what we're seeing from Celebrini is kind of predictable. This is a kid that his dad is the SVP of sports science for the Golden State Warriors. He's been training like a pro athlete since he was like 13 years old. He has the frame and body to be an instant impact NHL player. And he's played in high leverage situations as a young 17, 18-year-old player at Boston University. So not the NHL, but already used in those situations. And like 7 seconds left in a game, he's the guy taking the faceoff for Jay Pandolfo last year. When you've got those traits and you smash them all together, that's a player that can just hit the ground running. I don't think Bedard was set up for the same success. And in fact, I think Bedard needs to tweak some things. You mentioned the biz comments and the defensive play. I'm not really that I don't know that matters in the end, but I think he's got to tweak some of his skating mechanics. I think he's got to tweak some of his off-season training. And he's someone that I think could be a lot better than he's been. And he's also got he needs a mental reset. It can't all be on him. The pressure cannot all be on his shoulders. So once he learns that this is the best league in the world, and it's not that he needs to respect other players better. I don't think that's the case. He definitely has a healthy amount of respect for the league. But when you do everything in the WHL and you do everything in World Junior and it comes so easy to you, he's never really been hit with this kind of challenge before at any form of the game in his life. That's a lot to process in one relatively short period of time. And I've been comparing him to a career arc a lot closer to Nathan MacKinnon, if you listen to my comments over the last 6 months. And I thought it was fascinating that MacKinnon came out this past week when they played and said, look at this guy. He's basically been close to a point per game player. I would have killed for that at age 19. You have to remember, Connor Bedard's the second youngest player in the entire NHL this season. Yep. The second youngest. And when MacKinnon says that, and you know that it takes him until year 5 to become a point per game player, it just hits a little different. Now, they're different frames, different bodies, different everything, but I still think it's entirely possible that he does have a generational type impact, even though you hate the word.
Yeah, well, to me, your generation, like it should be saved for Ovechkin, Crosby, McDavid, guys who are just on different levels than other players. The other guys are super great, right? Like, funny, no one's ever even called Nathan MacKinnon generational. Look at his career.
I was just going to ask you if you think he fits.
He's definitely gotten closer now. And he's a prime example of why you don't, it's like people have to have a race. I want to be the first to say it. And then what happens is they don't think about the consequences of what they're saying. And so that's just me. I take a beef with it, but like any comparison to McDavid was so ridiculous. All you had to do is look at the skating. It's not even close. So I never understood it, to be honest. Evgeny Malkin's been an unbelievable player. Patrick Kane, those guys, no one calls them they're Hall of Famers, but they're not generational, right? So I think if we're going to call generational, it's got to live with it. And it's very much should be saved for the very true special players. And MacKinnon's getting closer, but then if you look at his career numbers compared to McDavid's career numbers, then he's not generational.
Fair. But in the end, I think MacKinnon probably will be generational. He'll be in that category. Like, we're talking about how many 100-point seasons, how many Hart trophies, how many Stanley Cups. Like, when he's all said and done, he's going to be damn close.
Yeah. Well, it'll be interesting to see the funny thing is probably got 10 years left for both guys at least. So lots of career left. The other team, Frank.
Do you think, by the way, since we're talking about Celebrini and Bedard, they went back-to-back number 1 overall picks, right? It's not ever going to be Sid and Ovi, but do you think they have a chance to create some magic? And especially because they're from the same town, do you think they have a chance to create a rivalry that we just haven't seen since Sid and Ovi?
Well, they are in the same conference at least, so that will help. They'll see each other at least 3 times a year, which I do think adds to it, no question. Ovi, what was unique about that was there was also, I think, a little bit of the fact that it was a Canadian and a Russian player, Frank. And you had Ovi who came in, and both of those guys were 100-point guys right out of the hop. And so they took the league on fire. And so I don't think it's going to be at the same level because those guys
players aren't at the same level.
Yeah. So that's why to me, and maybe in those 2 markets, it might be a bit and they look at it, but I don't think it's going to be close to the Ovi Crosby one, because you had Ovi come in, he's scoring 50 goals and 60 goals, and Crosby's going to the cup final, winning cups and scoring 100 points and scoring 120 points. So yeah, I don't think it's going to be the same.
If it would be North Van on North Van crime. You can't do that.
Oh, depends what part of Van you're in. There's
The
lots of
mean
crime.
Streets of North Vancouver.
Oh yeah. Seattle, what did you make? Like, they really only made they made a few deals, but obviously the big one was the Gordon Burakovsky deal. What do you make of that?
Great return.
Not Burakovsky.
I think a great return, but I felt like in the end, I mean, Tanev, they did okay. Did they do it? Did Seattle do as much as they could? Should they have done more in their teardown?
Yeah.
Would you have moved Alexiak? Would you have thought about moving Jared McCann?
I think you can still move Alexiak next year, Frank, and I'm not sure if the return will be drastically different.
But does keeping him bring you further away from the goal of getting a game-changing forward or player that you pick in the top 5 in the draft? Like, keeping those players has a downside for one more year, because it's just going to drag you closer to 20th place.
Well, yeah, maybe, like, because they're 28th? I got to look it up. I think they're 28th. They're them in Pittsburgh, 1, 2, 27, 28. So they're kind of right on that cusp area. I guess if, maybe Alexiak's a win, one extra win potentially for your team, possibly because of what he does defensively, but I'm not sure he's going to make that much of a difference. Like, I don't.
But if you're not winning with these guys and you're already that close, get in line for number 1 then.
Yeah. Wow. They weren't going to catch like Chicago and San Jose are 15, 17 points. They're not going to catch. They're not close that gap. It's more so Buffalo and Nashville and Seattle, I think, that are battling for like the number 3 or best odds for 3.
Yeah. I'm just, again, you're not winning with them. So what's the point in keeping them?
Well, but if you're, it depends what you'd get, right? Like if I'm only getting a second for giving up 2 playoff runs of Alexiak, then I ain't doing it.
There's no way it was just a second based on those market prices. We just talked about Dumoulin getting a second. Right. And it could be a pretty good second with where the Devils are in the standings. Like, it might be like the 18th pick in the second round.
Right. Yeah. No, that's fair. Right. So yeah, they probably could have looked at it. I wonder, how much, were teams really interested in him? Like who else was really looking for a D that didn't add it?
I mean, Luke Shen got a second and a fourth, and I think we agree that Alexiak,
but half the price salary wise, right?
Right. But is on the next rung up of tiered defensemen, right?
Yeah. Anyone else as far as the bottom teams? Trying to think of other guys who really, some of them just didn't make many moves. So I think we kind of.
I thought the Flyers did pretty well. I thought they were really patient in their approach. First off, getting a third for Andrei Kuzmenko. The wild part of that initial trade with the Flames, obviously they had to take Kuzmenko back from a money perspective to balance out the Farabee contract. And they did that and thought, okay, maybe we'll bring another Russian in to play with Michkov, and maybe that just provides him an additional level of comfort. They had played together previously. Oddly enough, Kuzmenko at the time of the trade had as many points as Frost and Farabee. In fact, had more. And they got a 3rd round pick for him. I think Calgary, they retained money, but I think Calgary, when they had Kuzmenko, they were thinking about the deadline going, oh, maybe we could get a 5th for him. So the Flyers get a 3rd, and then their patience in watching the market develop, instead of trading Scott Lawton a week ahead of the deadline, all of a sudden you see Yanni Gourde go off the board, and you see Brock Nelson go off the board, and you're looking at the center market and you say, it's Friday. There's still 3 teams that need or are looking for a center. we just got ourselves a conditional first round pick plus. It was pretty good.
Yeah. Now it's really early, but if you're the Flames, like Jacob Pelche, who they traded, he had 4 goals and 11 points in 24 games for the Flames this year. Farabee and Frost have combined now to play 28 games, and they have 5 goals and 8 points. Like, are the Flames early on not loving the return so far? And what Farabee has 3 goals, 3 points, and Frost has 2 goals and 5 points in that deal?
I mean, the true answer is probably yes, but that Flames team, like, they could jump out of a boat and not hit water. I mean, in terms of scoring, they cannot score. I mean, a rare game against the Canucks, an important game on Wednesday night, they get 3 past Kevin Lankinen. I'm like, oh, okay, 3. Wow, that's an improvement. Like, they can't get to 4 to save their lives. So the fact that Frost and Farabee come in after a big life change for them and struggle to produce, I can't say I'm totally shocked.
Yeah. Wow. I think they would like it at some point to get a little bit more offense, because you're right. They don't score a ton. No question. Like out of any of the teams who are currently in a playoff spot, like, they score the fewest goals by a significant margin. And that might be the reason why they don't make it. So, because suddenly, Frank, let's go quickly to that race, because Utah and St. Louis. Now, neither one of those teams, Utah did a ton of signing their own guys, but they didn't really add a lot. St. Louis obviously has had some injuries, and they made some changes before the year and haven't done much. But you wake up this morning and you're the Blues and you're Utah, and you are suddenly 2 points out, 2 back of Calgary and Vancouver, who have 71, and the Blues and Utah have 69, and Calgary has 1 game in hand on all 3 of them. Like, that is a legit race for 4 teams, 1 spot. And the Blues and Utah, like, Utah's gotten healthier all year long. That's their advantage. What do you make of those 2 teams and kind of how they approach the deadline and kind of just stood pat?
Well, Tyler will be able to tell us what the odds are from our friends at Bet365, but if I had to pick one of those 4 teams to emerge and be the playoff team in that 8th seed, I'm picking Utah. You mentioned they've gotten healthier. I think their entire game is different when Sean Durzee's in the lineup, and he helps produce a lot of their offense, or generate it, I should say. And we had John Goyens on Daily Faceoff Live a week or 2 ago, and he did a fantastic breakdown on Utah Hockey Club. Their metrics, both offensively and defensively, are really good. And then we looked at the video, and it's like, they can score and they can defend. They just don't get timely goals. Like, they need them in the exact moment that they need them, and they're not getting them. I think if they can find just a hair of confidence and mojo, that, a team that's, St. Louis is 7-1-2 in their last 10. Utah is 6-2-2. Meanwhile, Calgary and Van 4-6 and 4-2-4. Like, they've got momentum. All they need is like 10 really good days, and Utah could be in the driver's seat.
Yeah, well, I put it out there, and I know you chuckle about it, but who you play down the stretch matters a lot. And Utah's got the easiest schedule remaining. They only have 5 games against the top 12 teams. There's 12 teams in the NHL who have at least a 600 points percentage, and they only play 5 of them.
And I make fun of you, but Craig Conroy specifically, I had him on my podcast a couple weeks ago. He mentioned point blank that they have a really tough schedule.
Oh yeah, the Flames do. Yeah.
So he acknowledged, like, this is going to be a dogfight. So I didn't realize that Utah had one of the easiest schedules.
Yeah, and the Blues, right? Utah and the Blues, both are pretty even. Might actually, now that I say that, the Blues might have 5 and Utah has 7. My bad. It's the Blues who have 5. So their home games, everybody's got 9 home games left of all of them. So it's going to be very close. But I agree with you. Like, Calgary's in there today, but just looking at their sched, like, they would probably come at the bottom for me, just because they play a lot of tougher teams, and they haven't been able to score goals all year long. They're going to need Wolf to stand on his head pretty much every night. Now, he's been doing that. His numbers are great, but it's harder as you get down the stretch into crunch time.
Utah has to win their home games, and Calgary needs to win their road games. Calgary's 12, 13, and 6 on the road. Utah can't win at home. They were well under 500. I think they've won 4 of their last 5 at home. They're now 13, 13, and 7 at home, but they stunk at Delta Center to start the year. You mentioned 9 home games left. You win your home games, like you're going to be in good shape. They gotta find some success at home.
Speaking of Ty, let's bring in Mr. Yaremchuk. Ty, how you doing?
I'm doing good, boys. A new edition of Fill in the Blank brought to you by Bet365, where every nail-biting overtime win is a barn burner. Every face-off, hat trick, power play, shot on goal, and penalty shot. Every suspenseful moment in between is amazing. Whatever the moment, it's never ordinary at Bet365, an official partner of the NHL. Download the app today. Use the promo code NATION. Frank, you wanted those odds on the Western Conference playoff picture. It's actually interesting. Out of those, call it 4 teams that are in the hunt, all of them are plus money, which just goes to show how tight the race is. So the Canucks are plus 110. We got the Flames at plus 240, Utah plus 375, St. Louis plus 425. I'm tempted on Calgary at plus 240 there, if I'm being honest, Frank.
I mean, they're scrappy, and like, I get it. They've sort of clung to it. I think if I were to rank them, I would have St. Louis 4th because they've been the least impressive of the group, I think. Like, they get it together for a few games and then they fall apart for a few games and they're back and forth. It's like win 2, lose 4, win 5, lose 6. Like that feels like what their season has been like. But Utah just, I think, is in a totally different category because they haven't been they survived 5 months without 2 of their top 4 defensemen. It's to evaluate them versus what happened previously for them and what they are now are 2 different things.
Yeah.
I see. It's funny. I take the Blues of those teams. I look at their schedule and they're their biggest long shot. They're only 2 points out. Give me the Blues for sure at that money.
Yeah, plus 425. It is actually pretty juicy considering how the standings look right now. All right, let's continue the conversation you guys were just having. Utah and St. Louis were 2 teams that kind of stood still at the deadline. I'll let you kind of put your own definition on what standing still is for this question, but the team that you're most surprised stood still during the deadline period is blank, Frank.
The Detroit Red Wings.
Oh, yeah.
Please, someone let us know if Steve Yzerman and the Red Wings have a pulse. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, I can't argue. I was like, I thought you were coming to me first because I was like, oh, to me, that's the easy pick. I'm like, honestly, I don't know what they're doing. I outlined it, man. If you look at their evaluation of defensemen over the last few years, it's crushed them. Like they didn't want to pay Hronek. They could have Hronek, Wallman, Seider, and Edvinsson as their top 4 right now. That'd be pretty good.
Yeah.
By the way, and I've told this story on air, so I'm not breaking any confidences. They traded Hronek in a 3-game losing streak out of pure emotional reaction.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not smart. There's
you want to hear a funny little thing about Detroit. Now, they finally got a win last night. But last season, after 59 games, they'd won their previous 6. They were in the number 1 wild card spot. Then they lost 6 in a row, fell out, ended up losing a playoff spot in a tiebreaker. This year, after 58 games, they had won 6 in a row and then proceeded to lose 6 in a row again. They finally stopped that funk last night with that win. And Pat Kane said, okay, enough's enough, and got 5 points. But you're talking almost the exact same time of year. Both years they're in the wild card number 1. And this year they fell from that all the way down. And now they're 5 points back of Ottawa. They're 3 points out with all these teams. Like they cratered at the worst possible time. Now the games were very different last year. They got blown out, but to me, it's not lost on me that they just kind of fell apart at the exact same time. Game 60 and game 59 starting both losing streaks. It's kind of weird.
With 2 different coaches, by the way.
Yeah.
Next one I got for you guys, new article up at dailyfaceoff.com from our friend Matt Larkin, who listed 6 teams who have just a boatload of cap space to spend this summer. So my question for you guys, actually, I'll give you the teams first. He listed the Canes, the Hawks, the Blue Jackets, Penguins, Utah, and Winnipeg. So those are your 6. Your question is the team with the boatload of cap space that is going to be facing the most pressure to spend it is blank, Greg's. Which GM is going to have a big checkbook and be itching to spend?
Well, Carolina is pretty competitive, so I would go there. The problem is you got lots of money now. I guess if you spend it wisely, that's the key, right? If you look at big name free agents, I guess we'd start with Mitch Marner and say, okay, he's there. But how many other big productive guys now? Like somebody's probably going to overpay Ryan Donato. Nikolai Ehlers, what's he going to get? Matt Duchene's been a great value. And you love Matt Duchene at $3 million. What's he going to get? So I'm not now, unless you're going to do it for trades. That to me is where you can make your money. If you try to do it in free agency, I'm not sure you're going to get a big bang for your buck. I think you're going to say, well, we got all this money. You'll end up overpaying guys. So to me, it's going to come down to trades. And then to do that, you've got to have assets to match your cap space.
Well, that's why Chicago took on that Shea Weber deal, because now it's just less that they have to spend to get to the floor.
Yeah.
Right. So they weren't incredibly far away from it. I don't think they have to go crazy, but it's the year after this. They have to spend, I believe, $64 million just to get to the minimum spend. So they're going to have to probably start shelling some of that out now.
Yeah. On short-term deals, right? Do 2-year deals and overpay a guy for 2 years doesn't hurt you.
That's the saving grace for them this year, is the vets that didn't produce that they brought in and paid. Like a lot of them were on 1 and 2 year deals. So no harm, no foul. You just move on. But I will say, well, Carolina is a really good answer. What about Winnipeg? I think last time I looked, Winnipeg has $42 million in cap space. I mean, yeah, they have to, like, you got to pay Pionk if you're keeping him. Ehlers is a discussion point. Then you can have some other conversations, but let's see what Winnipeg does in the playoffs. And also, when thinking about Carolina and their situation, obviously they're going to be aggressive. So will Utah. I just want to get this out there and say it. Re-signing Taylor Hall, if that's what the Carolina Hurricanes choose to do, if they give him a multi-year deal, I guess it depends on the AAV, but I think that's going to be a mistake.
Yeah. All right, last one I got for you guys. Let's turn our attention to the playoff races. I think it is really cool looking right now at just some of the possibilities we have for playoff matchups, like Dallas versus Colorado, maybe trending more towards a lock. You could get Florida, Tampa. You could get Toronto, Ottawa. There is, and this one is a massive long shot, but there is somewhat of a world where we get Florida, Boston in round 1. So I want to ask you guys, of all the possible playoff matchups, if you could lock in one right now, basically it's the one that you want to see the most, which one would you lock in, Frank? Blank versus blank.
Florida, Tampa. Battle of Florida in round 1, with both those teams having loaded up a little bit. One of them is going to be bitterly, bitterly disappointed losing in round 1. And God, Jay, you answer, and then I've got a little trivia question for both of you.
Well, what's great about Frank's scenario is if that happens, then you also get Toronto, Ottawa, most likely, right? Because Toronto wins, and they'll get the number 1 wild card, which is trending right now to Ottawa. So that's a double win. But to me, it's Colorado, Dallas all day long. Rantanen versus his former team, 2 big juggernauts. Like, oh yeah, I'm taking that one all day.
Yeah, that's a good one. I messed that up. But my trivia question, do you guys know the last time that all 7 Canadian teams qualified for the Stanley Cup playoffs? Or 7 Canadian teams, I should say.
93.
Nope.
Sorry, 7 Canadian teams would have qualified for the playoffs. When's the last time that would have happened?
Yes.
Do you have to go back to when it was like the Nordiques were in the league? Were there 7 then? Yeah, you do.
21 team league.
So 1980?
1986.
No.
So it was the Nords and also the Jets 1.0. And the Sens obviously didn't come in until 1993 again. So interesting, but that is also a real possibility when you look at the standings. The Flames need to get in. You got to get the Habs, who are just 1 point out. They've got to get in, but that's it. And the Canucks obviously
fall apart. Yeah,
you need Van. Yeah, but it is possible.
Mini would have to tank, right, for that to happen.
I'm just saying, It's been
Yeah.
a long time. I mean, we're not that far removed from all 7 Canadian teams missing the playoffs.
What year did that happen in?
I think that
28?
was the Austin Matthews draft year.
Oh,
Yes. Yeah. I was going to say, I thought it was 16, but it might have been 15. But yeah.
I called them Canada's Lotto 7 because they were all in the mix.
that's fair. That'd be something.
Matthews and Laine won 2 for Toronto and Winnipeg.
And Puljujärvi 4. That is a wrap on this week's edition of Fill in the Blank, brought to you by Bet365.
Yeah, it didn't work out for the Oilers very well at all. But they did get that McDavid kid the year before and Draisaitl the year before that, so they're okay. But hey, they could have had so much more. The outside of Connor McDavid. Now I know they got Ethan Bear and some other guys, but the Griffin Reinhart trade.
They missed on a Kachuk.
Well, the Griffin Reinhart trade, man. Are you kidding me?
No, I know, but I'm saying that same Puljujärvi year is
Kachuk,
like
yeah.
Kachuk year. Yeah.
Yep. Mm-hmm. So no,
That's
that
a
was
hard
not.
yikes. Anyone that passed on either of the Kachucks is a hard yikes.
Yeah. Yeah. If you look back at the 2016 draft, he should have went number 2 after Austin Matthews.
Yes.
Yeah. So fascinating stuff. Next week, Frank, there's something we're going to get into on Monday's pod that's just about the league as a whole, a little bit of a teaser that I want to touch on with you, something that I think, well, just to our listeners, I'm very curious what the audience will think of what we want to talk about next Monday, something that has become a decade-old trend in the NHL that to me is going all the wrong direction. So a little teaser for Monday's pod that I think will get people fired up.
You're such a tease.
Never a bad thing. That's a rundown brought to you by Bet365. Have yourselves a great weekend, everyone.
What's up, hockey fans? If you enjoyed that video, then you need to be hitting the subscribe button right here at Daily Faceoff. Exclusive interviews and analysis from our hockey insider Frank Seravalli, fantasy updates from Brock Sagan, and a daily live show at noon Eastern, Monday through Friday. You don't want to miss any of the fantastic content, so hit that subscribe button.